Do you know that feeling of things just being unfinished? Right now it feels like a lot of things are just unfinished. I know I'm thinking about our kids who during the school year, there'll be these days when they just don't want to get out of bed and they don't want to go to school. And this winter they were so disappointed that they never had any snow days. And then now they're disappointed that they can't go to school. And I get it. It is disappointing. It's sad. It's frustrating. Our oldest can't, finish her last year at her elementary school. And the younger ones, they're all beginning to really miss their friends and the daily routine of going to school. And so this whole year for them is just unfinished. Or I think about my wife, Kara. She was telling me how her last week at work before the stay-home order, she was actually not at work. She was away at a work conference in Ann Arbor, so she couldn't be with her staff. And even though they're continuing to work, with Zoom calls and email and all like the basic functions of work are still happening, but there was no closure, right? There was no way to wrap up the being together. It just all feels unfinished. And sometimes this unfinished feeling doesn't just come in this time of stay home and this world pandemic. It just comes in the everyday things. Like, how often do you feel as if the things that you're trying to accomplish and work on are just unfinished? On the other side of that, though, I'm looking around my backyard, or earlier this week we were out hiking, and I'm noticing wildflowers pop up, right? And I'm noticing the grass beginning to green, and I'm noticing all of the sounds of the birds that have returned after the winter. And I'm realizing, in some sense, the work of God's creation is never finished. That when God called all of creation into existence so long ago, at the end of that creative process, God stopped, and I always envision God folding God's arms and just sort of looking out at everything and taking a deep sigh and then saying, yeah, this is good. But God didn't finish. The creation just continued on. And so, especially in places like Michigan, that we see that every year, right? When the new life springs up this time of the year. And so we get this sense that even the work of God isn't necessarily finished. It just continues on, and it keeps blossoming and growing and expanding. And yet, from the cross, Jesus said the words, "It is finished." This year for Lent, we've been talking about the 7 last words of Jesus. This morning, which is also Palm Sunday, we find ourselves talking about the 6th of Jesus's last words. It is finished. And it begs the question, what is finished? What is finished? When Jesus had to muster up all of that strength and energy and breath to utter out those 3 words, it is finished, what was he talking about? What is finished exactly? Surely not the creative act of God. And we know that his life wasn't finished because 3 days later he resurrected. So what was finished? What if what was finished was God's work of redeeming all of the brokenness of the world? You see, when God first created the world, God looked over everything and said that all of this is good. Everything is good. The plants, the animals, the earth, the ground, the sky, the sea, the fish, the waters, us, humanity, we are all good. And then over time, enter sin and human brokenness. Not to say that because of those things we are no longer of good, but it is to say that we hurt, and that there is suffering, and that there is brokenness. And so God's redemptive work in the world is to redeem all of the world's hurt and brokenness back to the prior good that God first saw at the moment of creation. And so what if when Jesus said, "It is finished," what he meant was that redemptive work of restoring and renewing all things was finished. I think that's what he was talking about. And so it's still easy then to look around and say, yeah, but there's still brokenness, there's still sin, there's still hurt. We're in the midst of this stay-home order, and people are suffering and dying at alarming rates because of coronavirus. What do you mean it is finished? God's redemptive work is finished. Well, the good news is that 2,000 years ago on the cross, God's work of redeeming the world was finished. I think about it in terms of a chess game. The last move isn't necessarily the very last move, right? The move that wins the game is the checkmate, right? And then there's one more move to seal the deal. Jesus' death and resurrection are like the grand checkmate to the world's brokenness. And now we are just waiting for the fullness of it all to come to pass. And we, the church, we're the next step. Jesus said it is finished, but the work isn't done. The church is the not done, right? The church is the body that is continuing the work of partnering with God to make visible, to make plain all of God's healing and redemptive work for the world. So it began with God's act of creation, when God sat back and said, everything is good. And it culminated in Jesus' death when he said, it is finished, and we were completely redeemed. And now this side of Jesus' death, we, the church, we are the bearers of that good news. We get to experience that redemptive work, and then we respond to it by partnering with God and telling the world about God's good news of redemption. Peace of Christ, friends.